Hello, and welcome to this very special episode of Such a Nightmare, Conversations About Horror. My name is Katherine Troyer, and as always, I am joined by Toni Tresca.
Hey there!
But who cares about Toni? Because more importantly, I and Toni are joined by these incredible authors. Christopher O'Halloran, Antony Frost, Carson Winter, and Alex Wolfgang. Hello.
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 And I just realized I didn't ask you, is it Wolfgang or Wolfgang? I should have asked that important question.
Oh, you're fine. It's Wolfgang.
Gang, okay. German was the language I chose, so they're like, you say everything wrong, so I've just learned to say things differently. These four authors came together in all of their infinite wisdom to collaborate on the 2021 novella collection Bloodlines, 4 Tales of Familial Fear, and you can see that Toni has it there. Bloodlines manages that rare feat of the anthology. It offers 4 stories that stand on their own as unique nightmares, while simultaneously building a collection of stories that are made the richer for their being alongside one another. The authors, each talented in their own rights, seem to know that the true magic of horror is, like any good family, complicated, complex, and terrifying. Read separately, the stories let you explore everything from domestic horror to cosmic horror. Together, the stories, and by extension their smart authors, remind you that home is where the heart, that bleeding and broken heart, lies. Gentlemen, thank you so much. Before I introduce you all individually, because we're going to do that too, I want to stop talking for a second. I'm going to let Toni just talk about the thing that caught their attention. Then we can hear from you, and then I will be sure to introduce you more officially.
Yeah, so right off the bat, I just loved the way that the book started right from the get-go. The opening dedication that you guys just said. The book is dedicated to all the indie writers, the aspiring wordsmiths, the amateur storytellers. That's what we are, 4 dudes who met on the internet and threw a collection together around a common theme. Anyone can do it, really. That's 3 sentences. Now go write a book. I just knew right from there that as I was reading, it was going to be a really special book because it just was clear you guys just loved doing this. And so my first initial question that we can use to introduce each of you and just get the conversation starting is like, I just would love to hear a little bit more about this publication process and how the 4 of you, self-described 4 dudes who met on the internet, came together to write this collection.
Carson, you want to take this one?
Yeah.
Take this one.
I'll jump in. I actually like to talk the most of everybody here. So, so the project started on a common Discord that we were all a part of, and it really just kind of came from a sense of a stagnation within being in the submission game as an amateur writer. You're constantly waiting for stories to come back. You're going against 500 other authors. All of them very talented. You're going against the authors you admired in the first place that got you into the game at all. So when writing horror or anything, you're spending a lot of time waiting, and you're spending a lot of time getting rejected. That's just kind of the rules of the game. Mm-hmm. So I just was kind of like, hey, fuck it. Like, anybody want to do something with me? Like, let's make a project. Let's do something fun. Like, for me, I've always kind of had my fingers in the punk rock scene, and I'm a devotee of the idea of DIY. I think sometimes you just gotta make something. You gotta do something cool. So I put the feelers out there. These 3 fine gentlemen responded and said, yes, I want to do something. We started a horrific group chat that has only grown more horrific over the last 7 to 8 months.
There are graphics that are graphic.
Yes.
And essentially we just kind of joined together. We talked about what we wanted to do. We kind of landed on the idea of doing novelettes because they're especially hard to sell. Mm-hmm. And we saw what some of us already had, and what some of us wanted to do, and then we just we did it, and that was it.
That's so great. Anyone want to offer the other version of the history in case Carson got anything wrong?
I think that's spot on.
Excellent.
That's exactly what happened.
That sounds good.
I know. I thought that Alex came up with the idea a long time ago, but I think it was Carson
Yeah, we pulled receipts. This comes up like every 2 months.
Yeah. I have to correct myself every time. I have to correct myself because, that's my eternal embarrassment.
Well, it wasn't even that long ago, too, and we just keep forgetting.
Yeah. It came together really, really quickly, like over the course of a single day, so it was kind of a quick rush. But I think we were all there, like in the writer's room, just kind of chatting. And the group chat followed like within a couple of hours, so yeah, worked out great.
Were these all original to this collection stories, or were some of these previously written?
I had mine written a few years ago, and I think Alex, you did too, right? You had yours?
Yeah. Mine was about a year old, and I'd been submitting it to a few different places, but I couldn't. It was so long that it was kind of hard to find places that were even looking for stories that long.
Mm-hmm.
So that was It was about a year old, and I think since we both had family themed stories, that was kind of how the theme got started. And then Carson and Antony both wrote to the theme, and then we just already had them. So
that's fantastic. Would you all be willing to say the title of your novelettes? Mainly because I want to hear how Antony says his title.
So the title of mine is Nos da Tad, which is Welsh for Good Night, Dad.
That's sweet when you don't know what the book is about.
Yeah, no joke.
Yeah, no kidding.
Mine's called The Heads of Leviathan.
And mine is I Am Not to Be Replaced.
Mine is Our Migraine.
Excellent. So we prepared some questions ahead of time because I never feel like you should pop quiz someone in an interview so that you have some time to think. And we'll just kind of work our way through the questions. Toni and I'll alternate it, and you can answer as much or as little as you want. We like to start with one that is, sort of the like soft question before we get to the hard hitting, like, but tell us what scares you. So the starter that just kind of like ease into things. What is a horror text that you have read or watched or played in the last year that moved you?
I'll start off with this one. For me, it's definitely going to be The Fisherman by John Langan. Obviously, that's not a 2021 release, but I just read it for the first time last year, and I found it to be incredibly powerful. It's weaving together a sort of like folklorish atmosphere with kind of quite big, strong cosmic horror, but still making the story sort of very human.
That sounds lovely.
Yeah, it's really good.
That's one of the few cosmic horror stories I've read that made me cry at the end. So that was quite an accomplishment.
Yeah, rereading it this year, it was way better. Once you know what's coming, there's those additional layers that come in, and that book just hammers those home.
Was that one of the Howl books?
Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah.
So for those of you that don't know, all of these gentlemen, and the way that I know them is through the Howl Society, which I can never remember what all the letters stand for, but it's the Horror Obsessed Writing and Literature Society, and it's a great community of readers and some of the most prolific writers I think I've ever encountered, let alone horror writers. What about the rest of you? What have you been reading, watching, playing, and it doesn't have to be a 2021 release that's really caught you and moved you this year?
I'll
this
jump
year,
on. Oh. No, Chris, me.
Okay, go.
Go ahead, Chris.
Battle of the Orange Beards.
No, go for it, dude.
I've actually been making my way through Christopher Buehlman's entire oeuvre. Because he what was the first book I read from him? It was his medieval one, Between Two Fires, and I got into his contemporary stuff, or I guess it's all kind of like dated, and I've just loved like literally every book he has. It either has me in tears at the end, or it has me just seething with rage because it's just the injustice. I find he's such a good, he's so great with the emotions, which is the main thing I look for in a book. And I actually find that he is the closest literature contemporary to my favorite writer-director, Mike Flanagan. So I find those two creators go hand in hand.
Excellent.
My favorite short story writer, I think probably ever at this point, is Brian Evanson. And he had a really, really excellent collection that came out last year called The Glassy Burning Floor of Hell. So that was really inspiring. I think he's one of the few short story authors who's super prolific, but I will like go out of my way to read pretty much anything that I can find from him. I think I've read like 4 or 5 of his collections at this point. But yeah, nobody really writes like him, and he's constantly an inspiration. So I would say that was probably my favorite book from last year.
Great.
And I'd agree with Alex on that one. That's one of my favorite books of the last year I read. But if I was going to do something original and not just piggyback on Alex, which I occasionally do, I would say one I just finished is incredible, and it's actually written by a friend of many of us, Christy Nogal's Beulah. Yes. I think is a just fantastic debut novel. It is so beautifully depicted in the way that she writes characters. It's so earnest and empathetic, and it's not afraid to just delve into people. It is so interested in the people that inhabit the world she's created. And I just think it's something that everyone needs to read, because it's a really exciting novel with a lot of emotional resonance, and I think it has the potential to really blow up.
I love the fact that all of you talk about emotions and the characters, because that's one of my favorite things about Bloodlines, right? Is that even the characters that I'm not rooting for, they're still so well crafted, which is just amazing to do in the like 50 pages or less that all of you had.
And it's also so fitting that all of you chose novels or short stories as horror writers yourself. It's awesome that you guys are so deep into reading and consuming horror literature by what's clearly people whom you all respect and even in some cases know, which is very, very exciting.
It's awesome because you run into these writing communities, and so many people want to write without reading. And it's crazy. It's totally bonkers to me. I know, Carson, you've come up with that in your own travels along the internet, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's always going to be someone who says they want to write, but they also don't like reading. And it's kind of this symptom of, I think, being in love with the idea of being a writer, that there's this very potent image of like being on a bench on like a really sandy beach with seagulls and shit, and you're just jotting down your shitty poetry in a composition booklet.
Are you telling me that's not how it works?
Yeah. It's a lovely image, but it doesn't it's not necessarily the actual act of writing. And I think you absolutely need to be immersed in what's happening in fiction today, not just yesterday, but you need to know what's going on. I think besides, writing, what has really like pushed me as a writer is finding these writing communities and surrounding myself with people that are better writers than me. I can look at what they're doing. I can, seethe in jealousy for a moment, and then I can, get my ass back in the seat and start writing something, knowing the tricks they have and knowing what they can do, and asking myself, can I find it within myself to do that too?
And I know you're in the same boat as me, right? Your first love was film. My first love was acting. And this is a good way to keep your feet in the art form without relying on so many other people.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, for me, I think what I realized is I was less attached to a medium than I was to the notion of storytelling. I wanted to be a storyteller somehow. For me, earlier, it was film that I latched onto. I really wanted to be a filmmaker because that's how I could tell stories, mostly because that's what I was exposed to the most. Over time, though, I kind of realized I was mostly talking a lot of shit about making movies, and I never did anything. And that's a real problem when you want to be a storyteller. You eventually do have to tell the story. So that's kind of why I started transitioning to fiction and making it my mission to understand it a lot better, so that I could actually have something to show for my interest.
And what's lovely about all 4 of your stories is they would work very nicely as a cinema. I think particularly Alex, yours would be so beautiful, right? And we'd have these like beach scenes, and it would just be so evocative. But the part that makes them all so terrific, the parts of your stories that are so rich, are the character development and the insight into the characters that it's really hard to do with most modern filmmaking, right? In part because sometimes you have characters like Carson's, right, that are not there, and we need to hear their thoughts, and but also, I think about Antony and your story, how we need to feel along with our main character that complicated, like, I love my dad, hate my dad, love my what, right? That like relationship that I think many people have with a parent, particularly a parent that's not present, right? And I don't know if any of you would be able to give it to somebody else to make a film version that would be richer than the stories you've provided. Toni, do you want to start the second question, which I promise you we're not using this question to like build a list of things to terrorize you with.
Yeah, there will be no torture. We won't be using this against you later, none of that. But we are interested in hearing a little bit about what scares you in real life and how these fears play into your own writing. Obviously, family seems to be something that's at least a little scary, and you can go elaborate a little on that or take it in a totally different direction.
Well, if we want to continue on the family theme, I had my son 2.5 years ago now, and that introduced a whole whack of things to be scared of. Especially once he learned how to walk, and he learned how to walk really early, which meant he learned how to run really early, which means he learned how to terrorize me in parking lots really early. So he likes to run in between cars and, try and get out of my reach. And he thinks it's all a game, but, these hunks of metal flying towards you, they're not playing. So that's been the biggest scary thing for me.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Anyone else?
Yeah. I'll go next. So I think fundamentally there's two things that really scare me and that really sort of work their way into my writing. The first one being, this is probably a bit of a cliche answer, but to a certain extent, I'm kind of scared of myself, or more specifically my own capacity for things. Like everyone's capable of, malevolence in some fashion or other. I get a lot of intrusive thoughts. And I'm constantly scared of kind of like consequences for actions I didn't intend, I think both of those areas are quite ripe for horror. Like the idea that there's this like little bit of you living in you that tries to persuade you to do things you don't actually want to do, that don't line up with your own ethical standards. And then the other thing being that you can just, do something that seems inconsequential, then someone perfectly innocent might end up suffering because of that. And then the other thing I'm scared of is essentially just power, right? Like power and authority, and what it does to the person who holds it. Because I'm a big believer in the fact that power corrupts, and that's like something I like to play with a lot in fiction, is the idea that power and this sort of desire for power it messes people up. It's like a brain disease of some fashion.
Yeah,
absolutely. Alex, you want to go just so I don't talk?
You're fine, yeah. Mine's kind of similar to Antony's. I think powerlessness and lack of control in general sort of freak me out in a sort of abstract and an abstract way, like large scale systems of power, like not being able to comprehend the things, the forces that run your life, that change the way that your daily life goes about. I think it's really right for cosmic horror in particular. I think it plays into my story a lot, just the idea that it can kind of be an internal thing or an external thing. As far as lack of control, like Antony said, not knowing yourself, not knowing what you're capable of. But in terms of like in my story, you have a character who really is trying to hold everything together, the things that he holds dear, but it's breaking apart in ways that he doesn't really comprehend or doesn't really understand. And that's kind of a theme that I find myself returning to pretty often.
For me, I'm going to bring things down a little bit and say I'm afraid of death a lot. It's kind of an obvious one for, people, everyone who's a person right now. Death is very scary to me. I think the ending of consciousness terrifies me, because I do think that being alive is very addictive. You become used to being a lens through which to see the world. And the fact that that lens is going to be shut at some point is terrifying, because it is the end of you. And it's hard to imagine to a certain extent. So for me, death is a huge one. Of course, that definitely figures into my story for sure. But I could say in some ways, though, that my story is almost a little escapist in that way, because there are ghosts. I'm an atheist. I don't believe in any afterlife. But in my story, I feel like almost there is a sense of pleasure and escape in dying, in that you can you still have some sort of existence. Other than that, though, I'm like really terrified of like roles and identity, the way we're slotted into our roles in a society, and the everything that goes with that pushes us towards a destination. I think that's terrifying, the way that your class or your job can define you in a way.
Yeah. Wow. Those answers all fit so perfectly within like the stories that you guys wrote. I'm like hearing that and I'm like, oh my gosh, yes, absolutely. I get that 100%. Like Antony, you're saying this intrusive thoughts. I just immediately thought of the spiral that you established within your short story, and just this action spiraling out of control, not unintended consequences. Of course, Carson, the replacement. I also love the twist on ghosts within yours. The ghosts are the ones who didn't want to die and were still craving. And that's how they got stuck there. And Chris, of course, the children having to be in charge is kind of the whole thing of the migraines story as well. And then, of course, Alex, as you said, just that out of controlness that your central character feels. Just, yeah.
I teach a class it's a creative expression class, and my students are writing and making horror all along, and they'll always be like, but how do I make the perfect horror thing that will terrify everyone? And I'm like, no, that's not how it works. You just need to write something that scares you, and then only for you it will be horror, right? Like if it's not horror for anyone else, that's okay. And I have students, Toni can tell you, I'll have students who've been like, I've never watched horror ever or read anything. And then others that are like, look at my tattoo. This is how much I love horror, right? And there's no in between. But this, right, what you all just said, it's what made each of your stories so terrifying, right? Because I could tell that you put them down and were like, whew, got to step away for a second. Like I could feel that tension, which I think transitions nicely to the third question, which is, we all like horror, so we have all set aside the whole, like, what must be wrong with you sort of things that I'm sure we have heard elsewhere quite a bit. But what is it about the horror genre that seems like the ideal fit for you right now for the themes and ideas that you're currently drawn to as a writer?
Antony, you had a really good theory about horror on your podcast that I heard the other day. You were talking about horror as a genre not even existing for you. And you said it was a bit of a controversial opinion, but could you elaborate on that?
Oh, yeah. So this is my own little pet theory that there's no such thing as a horror novel, specifically horror novel, because for me, horror is not a genre as much as it's a sensation. It's a device. And you can get away with using that as a sole device in a short story. But for anything longer than, a couple thousand words, there needs to be something else, some other genre element to sort of tie it together. That could be slice of life or mystery. I tend to use mystery plots to some extent, or mystery elements. But yeah, I think the purpose of horror is a weird thing in terms of a genre, because it's not so set in what it is, right? Like pretty much any story can be made into a horror story by altering the perspective.
I'm so glad you said this. I'm going to let you finish, but I have to tell you, I'm like, yay, I'm not alone in this opinion. Keep going, please.
Yeah. So the big thing is, like, I could just use a really easy example, right? So horror versus urban fantasy. The sole difference is how well equipped the main character is to deal with the weird things and how much they know about it beforehand. That's the sole difference between like a supernatural horror werewolf story and an urban fantasy werewolf story, right? Really, fundamentally it is. And so for me, I like exploring the idea of characters who are in far over their heads, where everything is overwhelming. And I also really, really love the aesthetics of, Gothic fiction and weird fiction specifically, those kind of things. And I like throwing in a bit of philosophy and like some weird quantum physics based ideas into my work as well, because I'm just an insufferable nerd. So yeah, it's got to be horror. Like no one else will have me, basically.
And I have
feel
to
like
say,
I'm.
Oh, I was just gonna say, I've
Sorry.
been arguing for a very long time that Stephen King doesn't write horror for that very reason, Antony. That I don't think novel-length fiction can sustain that emotion for that long. Not without you hating everything about everything that you're reading, in which case you're probably not reading it to the end. So thank you. I'm just going to start quoting, because I keep telling people that, and they're like, that's nice. But now I'm going to be like, as the once great and wise Antony Frost said. And so now I don't have to worry about like people believing me, because I can just put all the onus on you. Chris, what were you going to say?
I was just gonna say that as soon as he said that on his podcast, I was like, yes, I don't think that's controversial. I totally believe it 100%, because I don't know, maybe a true horror novel, it needs to have ebbs and flows, but I don't think I write horror really. Like I just write stories that are intense in my mind. Like they have horrific moments. Antony, you were talking about like your actions having unintended consequences, which is something that I really love in the work of Stephen Graham Jones. You have people creating these horrific circumstances totally accidentally, and maybe that's what draws me to horror, is the same thing that scares you.
Yeah.
I think that since horror is a feeling that you're going for, it opens up the possibility for a lot of abstraction. Whatever you're fixating on at a certain point in your life, whatever you're thinking about a lot, whatever's freaking you out, there's always a million different ways to kind of manifest that worry, that concern, that thought into a horror story. And I think it works particularly well in short fiction. And I've noticed that more than other genres, it seems like you can take it in a million different directions as long as you have that core feeling to it. And so it's kind of, I like the playground feeling, the playground aspect to the genre that seems like it's always there.
Yeah, like anything can happen, right? Sorry, Carson.
No, that's all right. So I think I actually have a little bit of a divergent opinion here, but I don't think it really negates anyone else's, because I believe that really how you view horror as a genre and why you write it, it's very personal, and that's you can't really be too prescriptive with it. For me, I believe horror is rather boringly just a collection of tropes and imagery. That's it. It's the same building blocks, the same vocabulary of ideas that are kind of seen in different permutations across different genres. I think that's all genres really are. You can have a collection of tropes in romance, you can have a collection of tropes in horror, science fiction, but you can tell stories of, grief, coming of age, whatever, in all of them. It's just you're using a different vocabulary of images to do it. And for me, why I'm drawn to horror is just because I am. I've always liked it. It's that lexicon of ideas that appeals to me naturally. They're the building blocks I reach for when I'm trying to express myself.
Is there something about it being more extreme and like the limits kind of being not there that also appeals to you?
I'm not like a big extreme guy. I think there are elements to my personality where I do like to push envelopes sometimes, as our chat has shown. But for the most part, I think if anything, you can maybe draw a connection between anxiety and mental illness or something as being rather connective to the ideas of horror, the images in it, even going back to Poe.
Yeah,
and the Gothic sensibility. Yeah, absolutely. And it does seem like a natural fit to explore negative emotions if you so experience a lot of negative emotions.
Like inoculation, right? Like you You're giving your body you're giving your mind a small dose of this negative feeling to prepare you for potential exposure to a larger dose of that negative feeling.
Yeah, absolutely.
This wonderful article that came out during COVID-19. It talked about how horror fans were much better adjusted to this current state of the world due to their exposure to and the constant exposure to the horror genre. And I think that might be some truth to a lot of what you guys were just saying, expressing that feeling. It allows you to healthily tap into those negative emotions that you are definitely feeling.
Right.
Absolutely. I think it's also interesting, kind of off that thread, is that I think horror becomes escapism as the world becomes scarier to us. You guys look back into like the past, like, you know, decade or two, how big like zombie movies and television shows got to. It's interesting that nobody's really like scared of being in a zombie apocalypse. Everybody is secretly yearning for it. And they're like selling their fucking zombie kits and shit, and they're asking each other, what would you do? And it's
all those doomsday bunker prepper types. It's an aesthetic.
Yeah, and it's like, it's very exciting because people, and this is my theory, they really, really, really fucking hate their jobs. And I blame capitalism, essentially. I'm going to put it all on capitalism. And I think it is kind of a scary moment when our horrific imagery becomes escapes from our like everyday reality.
Yeah, because we think that it'd be easier to deal with a zombie apocalypse than to deal with taxes.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, there actually have been several studies that have charted, it's particularly the zombie genre, right? And just talking about the exponential increase post 9/11, right? And just the number of zombie films that emerged after, because it was like, you know what? Let's go back to what's much more manageable in its scariness. One of the things I really like about these stories together, because each one separately is really good, but together it's an outstanding collection, I think, is because of how you all are approaching horror differently. Toni and I were talking about the fact that the next iteration of my class that I do topic-wise, that I need to assign this book, and I very much agree, because as I was reading it, even as someone who deals with horror all the time, I was reminded of the versatility of horror, and the fact that horror is at its richest when, like you all said, it is but one of the many tools at play, and each of you reminded me of just what horror can do in very, very different ways, and that's an incredible feat to do in just four long short stories.
I think that's a great segue into our next question, which is, how do you think that Bloodlines as a collection, what do you think it offers to the reader that extends beyond or would be otherwise different than if readers just read each of your stories individually? In other words, why these stories together now? You talked a little bit about the publication process and how you came together around the theme, but love to hear like what you guys have gained from like reading of each other's stories and how that shaped your work.
Well, I think
go ahead.
For my part, sorry. I think on my end anyway, like I'm not going to lie and say there's some great level of intentionality. Like I didn't, plot anything out beforehand as such. But I think reading them all together, particularly with the intro as well, the intro by Solomon Force, I think the reading experience of the whole book as a unit, it is valuable for probably two reasons. The first one being there is a subtle through line throughout all the stories, which I don't think was intentional, but it's sort of there anyway, in which like the weirdness builds and pure horror gives way from one story to the next. It becomes slightly less pure horror and slightly weirder, which I think tends to follow my experience of familial relationships as well.
Speaking to that foreword, I just want to read like one of the nuggets in there. I love that foreword, and I think it really does complement this idea of like the core of horror is the violation of reality, and what's more real to us than our family home, the rules, and the miniature kingdoms that we've known since birth. But yeah, all of those together. Yeah, brilliant insight, and really unifies all of it, because all of you break reality in very different ways.
Yeah. I think what people can glean from this is that there are a lot worse families out there. I hope that's what they get from it, because, you know, over the last few years, we've been spending a lot of time with our families, you know, whether that's in quarantine or just trying to keep your bubble small. So they've been driving us nuts. So when you look at a story like Our Migraine and you see the things that these three sisters are doing to each other and the way that they're coming apart and breaking apart, I hope that's inspirational. Like, you look at your sister and you think, well, I would never do that to you.
See, actually, I had a response that was very similar to Antony. I was like, what if it did happen? What if I did do that? So I was like, I suddenly became very afraid of what I would do in that situation, because I think we all want to be the good sibling, right? But like, would I? So that very much touched into that fear of like, but I bet I'm not as good as I think I am.
It's like what Antony said about power corrupting, you know. If you have that option in front of you, are you going to take it? Are you going to push that button?
Yeah.
Carson,
Like
Alex?
staring down Alex. I'm trying to decide if he's going to talk or I am.
You go for it first.
Okay. For me, I think the value of the stories next to each other is really like a 360-degree view of the family unit, because while we're all kind of the authors here are bound by race and class in some ways, I think as we grow as humans, especially in recent years, we've become more aware of different situations, and we've really been flexing our empathy muscles, and becoming more aware that people are just different. People are raised in different environments. And I think that's kind of something interesting, is that with only one story, you might not see yourself and your family in a specific story. But with all four of us together, you can see a greater range of experience in the family unit and connect to it that way.
Yeah, we have two stories that approach, sibling relationships in totally different ways. We've got one that kind of focuses more on the parent-child relationship. We've got one that's kind of more the extended family, like the nuclear family plus a few extras. And so, yeah, I think it's a nice way to acknowledge the fact that there's a million different ways to be a family. And some of the stories even incorporate in-laws, boyfriends and girlfriends of certain characters. And, these are all parts of families that you may not think of in the traditional sense, but functionally they really are. And so, yeah, it really wasn't intentional for us to take it in such different directions, but I think that kind of is just sort of more evidence that there really is a million ways to have a family. So I was really pleased with the diversity that we came up with.
I love what you said, Carson, talking about using horror to understand people more empathetically. And that was one of the things that I was really fascinated with while reading the four of your short stories, was how empathetically, even when these characters would do some difficult things, make some hard choices, it was always treated them very empathetically. And there was a diversity of types of characters and people with different lived experiences working and interacting within different types of family units. And I thought that was really refreshing to see, particularly like there was some queer representation in the family, and how does that play into different family dynamics? It's just really great to explore.
Yeah, that diversity element is just so refreshing, right? Because I think for a very long time it was, about non-white, non-male bodies being systematically broken and broken again, right? And you all really allowed us to be reminded that horror is at its best when we're thinking about intersectionality, and then how different aspects of our identities connect, both in terms of how we identify our worlds, but also how we identify, those in it. And I think about, Alex, your story, where there's some like literal incorporations of other identities, and is that, but there's such an intriguing way in which that story asks us, but is that much different from what we do normally, right? I mean, the pool, right? I don't have a pool that I descend down to and absorb my siblings, but like that idea of, I'll hear my brother say something, right? Like in my head, and I may act differently based on what I anticipate a family member saying. So that was really just very refreshing, and kind of beautiful to get that. So we often discuss in this podcast, and I think we've touched on this to some degree already, but the functions of horror through the critical framework given by a scholar named Linda Holland Toll of affirmative versus disaffirmative. And as a reminder to those of you listening, affirmative horror portrays the source of horror as threatening our social and cultural value systems, whereas disaffirmative horror is like, nope, we're the problems, right? The value systems are ultimately the source of horror. Where would you place, and maybe not just these stories, but just sort of the bigger body of your work, horror within this framework? Or how do you think about what horror, quote, should do? Right? How does that affect your stories?
I think personally, I think there's room for both approaches, of course, and there's definitely great examples of both. Personally, for my story and most of my work, I would say it is disaffirmative, mostly because a lot of it revolves around rigid structures that are proven evil by their influence. Most of my story is sort of about being trapped in a traditional social structure and then breaking free of it and breaking it up. And it's almost sort of revolutionary in a way. But I would say, I mean, I'm kind of shooting from the hip here. I think most of the stories in this collection, if not all, have that same kind of disaffirmative streak.
I wonder if that's a result of the society that we're seeing around us now. We're seeing the cracks in the foundation. We're seeing things start to be bared, brought to light, and we're starting to realize that maybe things aren't the way they should be.
Yeah, absolutely. I think about like what you were saying earlier, how everybody's been spending more time with their family and stuff lately because of the pandemic. But I also think of QAnon and how that has driven schisms through families everywhere. Mm-hmm. And it's suddenly, family isn't necessarily a safe place anymore. You often have to wage ideological war against your own family sometimes. And I think that definitely reflects in your writing, because how our own kind of implicit feelings about the family unit have changed over time.
Right. And, this new generation, we've been willing to make those hard choices where we decide, this person in my family is not helpful to my mental health. They're not helpful to my lifestyle. So I need to maybe stick to, like Alex said, these families that we've created on our own, not necessarily the ones that are given to us.
Yeah, absolutely.
I like to take, I like stories that take kind of an affirmative premise and then take it in a disaffirmative direction. Like, I guess you could use my story as an example where it starts out with a group of siblings and their mother dies. And so that on the surface, it seems like, our social unit is under attack from an outside force, and that outside force is death. But then throughout the story, you have these characters who realize that their social unit was not what they thought it was at all. And I think you can kind of take that same premise and apply it in other types of horror stories as well. If you have a story where a monster is attacking your family, then you can have that monster sort of be that sort of affirmative force. But then as the family breaks down in response to the threat, you can really explore like deep characterization through that breakdown. And so I kind of like stories that I think incorporate both sides.
I think all of your stories do that to a certain degree, right? Because there's some outside force, be it, the devil, a supernatural secret society, a migraine, right? But then we quickly realize that it's actually, the family that might be the most dangerous, terrifying thing. And sometimes it's the family, like in Carson's story, that loves you the most, right? That just wants to not be alone. Antony, is there anything you would add to this question?
I think so. I mean, to some extent, I think, Carson covered it really well in terms of my own feelings, I think. So for me personally, like one of my big bugbears in life is that I'm really opposed to sort of hierarchical structure. And I try and express that through my fiction. And like in my story, that's what, the spiral is kind of a metaphor for that. Like, it's just like these secretive group of predominantly straight white dudes who pull strings behind the scenes under the guise of, whatever else is going on. But like, I personally sympathize a lot more with this sort of disaffirmative idea, which which isn't to say that I don't think that the affirmative style of horror has its place. I think there is value in certain kinds of structure, for sure. Like just basic human relationships, or the basic sanctity of the human mind undisturbed. If something disturbs your mind and then the story is about that and you're trying to get back to where your mind was, harmonious, then you could argue that's affirmative horror, but that's the kind of horror that I really enjoy myself and do write a little bit of now and again. So I think both have its place, but for me, I lean more towards the latter, particularly with this story.
Well, it has been just absolutely amazing getting to chat with you all today. So gearing up then for this just one final question for each of you. Love to hear what is next from each of you and where all of our followers can get in touch with you. If you guys have any social medias, now would be a great time to share. So just hear, what are you guys working on individually and maybe collectively if you guys have another short collection coming in the work? Yeah.
The Bloodlines 2, 100% confirmed. We're setting a hard date of the Tuesday before Thanksgiving. We can't talk about it anymore. We haven't actually talked about it before.
This is the first I'm hearing of it.
Yeah, so anyways, that's definitely going to happen. We're going to pick a different theme, and this is going to be a yearly tradition till we all die.
Yay!
Amazing. Happy to.
Not on the death part, but the.
Otherwise, though, I have another chapbook collection coming out with another author, but it's not officially announced yet. Hopefully, that'll come out sometime this year.
It better.
Other than that,
because it's very good.
Well, thank you. He's a sweetheart. Otherwise, you can find me at Carson Winter 3 on Twitter, and carsonwinter.com is my website.
And all of the official bios that you wrote, which were lovely, as well as all the information social media, is in the description below for this episode.
Perfect. I've got 3 releases coming out, 3 short stories. Yes, I am very lucky. I have an anthology coming out from the Dread Machine, Mixtape 1986. I have a story in there called Jaws. It doesn't have any sharks in it, so just be warned going in. I have a story coming out in Howls from the Dark Ages, which is Howl Society's anthology for 2022. It's got a foreword written by Christopher Buehlman, so I'm super excited about that. And what was the other one? Oh, the other one I can't talk about.
But can you talk about your upcoming novel or no?
That novel is I'm pitching it around for representation. It's called Pushing Daisy. So if any agents are watching this and want to represent me, my Twitter is Burgle Infernal. You can find it in the show notes.
Excellent.
Yes.
Alex, Antony, fight to the death. Who wants to go next?
Alex, you go first.
Oh, that wasn't much of a fight, but okay.
Well, all 4 of us are in the early stages of working on another collaborative anthology with a separate writing Discord group, and we're still working on the initial stories for that one. But I'm not sure exactly when it'll end up. But 2 of us are in one of the anthologies, and 2 of us are in the other. So that should be fun. Lots of great, talented writers that we're working with there. I have a cosmic horror novel that I wrote a draft of back in, I think I finished the draft back in October. So I need to go back and do another round of edits for that and send it out to some beta readers. And I've also been working on a couple of thriller novels, which I'm putting out under a pen name. So I have had quite a bit of stuff that I've been working on lately. So I'm not sure exactly when the releases will happen for these things, but definitely excited about all of them.
Yeah, I can confirm that thriller is phenomenal. I know Carson read it as well, and it's a page turner.
Yeah,
it's a fucking blast. It's so much fun. I think a lot of people are going to dig it.
Mm-hmm.
And that one is actually, it does have a release date. That one's coming out in March, the first one anyway. It's called The Neighbors, and I'm writing it under the pen name Alex Witcher. Witcher is my wife's last name, so I wanted to keep it kind of separate from the horror stuff that I've been working on. So,
I love that.
Yeah.
Witcher's a perfect name too.
Yeah, I love that name.
And then let's see, what am I doing? What do I do?
You got a podcast?
You
I do have a podcast. Thank you for reminding me. Yeah, so I've got a podcast called Terrify Me, which is about scary things in fact, fiction, and folklore. So I release that weekly
And you
on
often have
Thursdays.
guest speakers on your show too.
Yeah, basically, I don't have a lot of spare time, so I do a lot of interviews because it's easier than like researching deep dives on weird folklorish things. But yeah, so I've got my next interview will be coming out next Thursday, and that'll be with Alex Woodrow, who's a Romanian writer and the acquiring editor at Tenebris Press. I've interviewed people like Christy Nogle, who's fantastic. C.B. Jones is a really talented writer. Yeah, that's really fun. Aside from that, I'm just working on a lot of short fiction and poetry at the moment, trying to sell that. Yeah, I think that's about all I'm doing.
Is your poetry horror-ish as well?
Some of it. It's I don't think I'll be selling much of the poetry soon because I'm still sort of playing around with finding out exactly how I want to write it. I'm quite new to it, but yeah, I'm writing a fair bit of it. See what happens.
I think that's one of my favorite things about so many of the Howl members is how many different modes of writing and creation you all engage in. That there may be that thing you return back to, but none of you has limited themselves to just one thing, right? So it's like, but wait, there's more. You want a full-length product? You want a podcast so you can hear a British accent? Right? Whatever you want, we can deliver it to. That's really neat. I mean, that speaks also to your all's individual talent, because that's not an easy feat to be playing with that many different modes of expression. Is there anything else that any of you were like, I don't know, I'm picking on Alex because he's like center for me on the screen, that like Alex is like, but the thing we didn't talk about is or like Chris's guitar collection. We didn't never bring that up. But Alex, that you don't have to be the one to have something to say.
That's it. That's all of us.
Yeah, if you guys could just, anyone listening, just buy a fuck ton of copies of our book, that'd be sick.
Yes.
Yeah. It's kind of ideal.
Yeah.
4 to 5 copies for your family members. It can also kind of send messages to them a little bit that you don't like them. If that's something you would like to do, if you would like to make your gatherings more awkward.
Oh yeah, my mum hasn't spoken to me since she read it.
Oh really?
Oh.
Yeah, I feel like I would want one of you to write a description, right? So it'd be like, dear family member, you should read this as a sign. Signed authors. Like if you'll do that for me, then I will happily hand them out to the family members I need to cut off from my life.
Yeah,
like,
make a little cameo video.
Subtext.
Yes.
No.
Make for the most interesting Thanksgiving yet.
Yes.
For sure.
I like that.
And also, when you read, because people will read this great book, you should also leave a review wherever it is that you leave reviews, such as Overlord's Amazon or Goodreads, wherever you might do it. Thank you all so much. This has been fantastic. Thank you for having an idea and carrying it through. I know there was a lot of challenges because it's not easy to be publishing in ways where you have to do all the things. But if you hadn't had that, we wouldn't have gotten this great book. So thank you so much. Thank you
So everybody, go get your copy of Bloodlines right now. Go support them. It's amazing.
Thank you so much. That means a lot.
You.
Yes, thank you.
Excellent. Christopher O'Halloran is a self-described milk-slinging Canadian actor-turned-author with work published or forthcoming from Hellbound Books, Tales to Terrify, and The Dread Machine. Fans of stories about vein removal and Phoenix women against the patriarchy can visit his site for stories, reviews, and updates on his upcoming novel, Pushing Daisy. Antony Frost is a factory worker, podcaster, and writer from Cambridgeshire, England. He lives with his wife and innumerable spiders. When not writing or reading, he can be found hosting Terrified Me, a podcast about scary things in fact, fiction, and folktale. Or, failing that, he'll be out in the fens poking things with sticks. Carson Winter is an author, punker, and raw nerve. His work has appeared in Apex, Vastarian, and the No Sleep podcast. He lives in the Pacific Northwest. Alex Wolfgang is a horror writer from Oklahoma. His debut short story collection, Splinter and Other Stories, is available now. You can also find his work in Cosmic Horror Monthly, Nocturnal Transmission podcast, and the anthology Howls from Hell. When not reading and writing horror, you can find him hiking and camping, playing tennis, and watching movies. Thank you for listening to our nightmares.
And have a spectacular day.